The Wes Penra Papers. A Journey Through the Multiverse. The Second Level of Learning. http://wespenry.com. Appendix A, Paper Number 1. Updates on the Remarkable Michael Lee Hill Case, Part 1. Proof of UFOs over Lake Erie. By Wes Penra, Thursday, November 9, 2012. 1. Abstract. An introduction to this extraordinary story. There is an eerie feeling about Lake Erie. The Great Lakes in America and Canada have always been a subject for supernatural discussions. Ships have sunk with crew members and all, and strange lights have been seen over the lakes for at least over 100 years. Sailors and people living by the lakes have a great respect for them. But the Great Lake that has probably created the most controversy of all times is Lake Erie. Not only because of what I told in the Remarkable Michael Lee Hill Case, in the First Level of Learning, but because this is not a new phenomenon. UFO activity has been going on there at least since the 1800s. Sometimes people get superstitious, and when they sit on the porch after dark, they imagine they see things. But everything is different with Lake Erie. The UFO activity there has actually been published in the media since back in the 1800s. So something is definitely going on there. However, if it wasn't for Michael Lee Hill, perhaps the phenomena taking place there would only get a headline or two, and then withdraw from people's memories again. Some UFO enthusiasts would point it out, but after a while it would have been debunked by some infiltrated UFO organization, the military, the government, or someone else. When Michael came into the picture in 2006 and started spreading the message of what he was seeing, anyone who had the agenda to debunk such experiences was working overtime. The UFOs Hill saw and filmed were explained as airplanes, firework, China firework blown off by party people, atmospheric phenomena, illusions, delusions, and, the reader gets it, it was the whole spectrum. And when Hill went on national TV with his experiences, the debunkers were there, trying to talk him down. But he also got support from unexpected places, by people who helped backing up his story, and the more Michael dug into this whole UFO phenomenon out on the lake, the deeper the rabbit hole went, it seemed. It eventually went so far that his projects were getting sabotaged from higher up, so to speak. Hill is quite a determined man. I've come to know him over the last 2 years or so, and he doesn't give up easily. Not so this time, either. When he noticed he'd run into a wall, and no one wanted to touch his story with a 10-foot pole, afraid of something, he turned to me again. I am not a big media man or a news anchor, I am not holding lectures, I'm not having any books people can buy in the bookstores, albeit a lot of material on the internet, and I'm not big on interviews, either. I'm more a person with a passion and a life mission to learn new things and educate people in what I learn, and as long as I can, I want to do it for free. I've never charged for any of my material. However, my point is that I don't have the same amount of visitors and listeners as David Icke, David Wilcock, and definitely not as many as CNN, History Channel, and other cable stations which have previously highlighted Hill's material. Instead, I prefer to be in the background, avoiding the commotion around the information I'm putting out, letting the material speak for itself. Hill knows this, but we both thought that this was perhaps the way to go for now in order to get the whole story out. There are still media willing to discuss his UFO films and how and where these films were taken, but the rest of the story is too hot to touch, it may burn someone's fingers. Therefore, Michael Hill and I decided that he'd give me his information and I could do whatever I wanted to do with it as long as I published the truth about his experiences. Additionally, we decided not to talk to anybody about this project, because Hill's attempts had been sabotaged before, in fact, pretty recently, as we shall see. I read through the material he gave me and saw a pretty amazing story unfolding from it. This had to do with so much more than just sightings over Lake Erie. Something very ancient, and hidden deep in the shadows, was now coming to surface in this very material. And not only that, his whole story including the one that was never told in public coincides pretty well with what I have been researching and writing about in these papers over the past year. Suddenly I understood why no one wanted to touch this, and why there were certain powerful people who did not want this story to come out. The idea to keep a low profile with it until it's time to publish, Michael and I thought was a good idea, and we decided to do so. But let's back up to get some coherency to this. I would strongly suggest the reader reads, or reviews, in case you have read it before, the paper I wrote on Michael Lee Hill on May 6, 2011, PFC paper number 2, The Remarkable Michael Lee Hill Case, http://westbenry.com/remarkable-michael-lee-hall-case.htm write parenthesis and then return here and continue with this next section. By doing this, the reader gets a much better picture of what this is really all about. 2. How Michael Lee Hill's projects got sabotaged. A phrase many writers use is, "Let's start from the beginning." This time, however, I'm going to start at the end. I guess that can work too, on occasion. After all, isn't that what they do in Hollywood films sometimes? Although this could make a pretty good Hollywood movie, it's anything but. After years of having spotted and reported giant multicolored orb-shaped UFOs over Lake Erie, close to where he lives, Michael Lee Hill thought it was time to tell the rest of the story. Around March 2012, he and Spike TV got in touch with each other, and Spike TV were willing to do a documentary on Michael Lee Hill's experiences. Michael was thrilled, because there was a huge budget involved, and they even had an actor, Andrew, who was going to play the young Michael in the documentary. So everything was not only planned, but the whole film project started and kept rolling. The film team came to Michael's house, checked out the surroundings, Michael showed them exactly where the sightings had taken place, and the creative discussions began on how everything should be done. It all looked very promising. A very inspiring project was then in the works, and during a 6 months period, from March to October 2012, Spike TV worked closely together with Michael to get the story just right. Michael worked very hard, and like I said, there was a huge budget set aside for this, because there had been so many sightings over Lake Erie over a long period of time, and Michael is the one who has collected the most evidence of what is occurring over Lake Erie. Then, all of a sudden, in October Michael was told by Spike TV that they unfortunately had to terminate the project. He just couldn't believe it, when everything went so well. He asked why they had come to such a decision, but the answer was vague and he was told that his story was just too big. It had been decided from authorities, in this case, probably Viacom, that the filming should stop and the team return home. Michael was devastated. He had spent 6 intense months of his life, not only working hard together with the Spike TV team, but he had also literally been tortured by being put through a lie detector test by the chief of police of the New York Police Department. Some of the documentary was filmed in New York. In addition, he hadn't requested 1 single cent in exchange and had given all his research into the Lake Erie UFO story to Spike TV. Michael felt betrayed and said to me that this is my life and what has happened, and it could have been a great opportunity for the world to really understand the bigger story of what is happening in the Great Lakes area. Apparently, someone did not agree to that this story should be told, and as we move along we will understand just how big this story is. Now, this would be bad if it was a single occurrence, but unfortunately there is more. In October, the same month the Spike TV project was closed down, the annual Popular Pythagoras Conference was supposed to be held in Kentucky. Every year it has a lot of prominent speakers in physics, astronomy, archaeology, quantum physics, and controversial subjects such as exopolitics, the study of extraterrestrial species, paranormal phenomena, and the spiritual evolvement of the human species. 2 of the guest speakers were supposed to be Dr. A.R. Borden of Life Physics Group California, LPGC, and Michael Lee Hill. It is my understanding that Dr. Borden was going to speak on the incoming Planet X, A.M.E., the wave of the supernova, and the importance for humankind to claim our sovereignty as a biokind, biological entities, something I have brought up quite a bit as well in the papers that are preceding this appendix. Michael, on the other hand, had planned to continue on his mission to tell his story to a larger audience. He was happy, because now he had both Spike TV and the Pythagoras Conference going at the same time. He felt he was starting to get his message out. This was before Spike TV closed the project down. Sandra Sabatini, a friend of both A.R.S. and Michael Lee Hills, is a great Pythagoras Conference enthusiast, and spends a lot of time, and her own personal savings, into this project. As the reader can see, it was scheduled to have some quite well-known guest speakers, many in the alternative field. It was going to be held on October 10 to 14, 2012, and had quite a few corporate and media sponsors. Sandra herself had put a six-figure dollar amount of her own money into this project. Being in contact both with Michael, Dr. Borden, and others connected with LPGC, I know that everybody was very excited about this event. However, this event was, just like the Spike TV project, cancelled. This conference was even cancelled in the last minute. An upset Sandra Sabatini wrote on the LPGC Facebook page on October 5, emphases in bold italics are mine. Immediate release. Update to our public and to our speakers. It is indeed sad to see the Pythagoras Conference Global be suppressed as, in retrospect, we see it was these last few days. The conference that was due to begin on October 10, 2012 would have been one of the most daring and explicit venues for bringing out information concerning forthcoming natural events that are said to affect the entire world. This is not to be, as if invisible minds and hands had declared our conference unworthy, even dangerous to the public for giving an outlet to presumed fringe elements, as we've heard through the internet grapevine to be the case. Let it be publicly known that we at Pythagoras take pride in carefully selecting speakers who are informed in their areas of specialty, and who are recognized in their fields and on the internet as knowledgeable and respected people. This year we had selected a core of such caliber of speakers. But the invisible minds and hands denied our public, indeed, the American people, access to what our speakers would have shared with everyone at the venue and through the internet. Fringe elements or not, there are too many indications in the collective unconscious, the religious aware, the spiritually open, and the humanist with a conscience that difficult times are coming. We at Pythagoras can err on the side of caution, and include information of this nature in the course of the conference, or err on the side of safety and leave such topics out of the domain of the gathering. We chose to include that kind of information because it is the right thing to do. If there is indeed something coming our way and it will present a sudden and unexpected severe challenge to all of us humankind, we the people need to know. This is not intended, directly or indirectly, as an indictment of official government for a suppression we are now learning is being carried out by officially connected rogue but emotionally disconnected individuals from the sum total of all of us, not just in this country. We are also now learning through the grapevine in the USA that those executing this operation are yet unidentified former intelligence and military officers. If these individuals are acting on behalf of the public good, it means their actions have official sanction. And the viewpoint that propels their action is not only misguided, but also grossly uninformed or perhaps even disinformed. If they act without official sanction, this borders on the criminal. Let's examine briefly what it is they are suppressing. The sad part may also be that official science may not know or have the means to forecast the occurrence of dangerous levels of radiant energies coming to us from space to do any public good. Even a half-hour notice to the unprepared is not only insufficient, but useless. Public preparation to meet such a challenge was to be one of the hot topics in the conference, which now is not to be. We are further learning that the aim of this campaign was the suppression of the freedom of speech of specific individual presenters at the conference. The reasons are obscure to us at this time. We now are learning that by giving sanctuary and a platform for speaking to these individuals, this conference is now not to be. How was this phenomenon accomplished? The only answer that occurs to us is that this was a well-planned and intelligently executed campaign laid out most likely months in advance. It may also have involved an unofficial intervention in the setup of the conference itself. Why would the venue itself breach its own agreement with our company by demanding complete prepayment instead of the agreed net 30 payment scheduled and agreed well in advance? This was in fact the death knell to the conference itself. Coming up with a sum nearly 6 figures large on such short notice was near impossible, and it was. We now publicly ask, why? Why suppress this conference? One of the strengths of our conference is the willingness to be inclusive and allow points of view and information sources to surface for the consideration of the larger whole, our society and the world. What is valid and evident always rises to the top, a cream of the conference crop for the year. But this year, it seems now that both the topics and select few individuals were targeted, and the only ones we can think of are related to topics regarding the challenges presented by forthcoming natural events. In our view, this is as good as throwing the baby out with the bathwater. This information is bound to come out on other venues, other media, other times. Eventually, valid information finds the light of day. In the meantime, what has been done to Pythagoras has repercussions well beyond that intended by the actions of these rogue elements. This is indeed a crass suppression of our right to hear and know. The baby thrown out with the bathwater cannot be allowed to wither and die. Additional information will be released soon. Humanity has a right to know the truth. Sandra D. Sabatini. Pythagoras Conference Global. Reading Sandra's announcement makes it quite clear that someone didn't want this conference to happen. Apparently, the venue broke its own agreement with the arranging management by demanding a complete prepayment instead of the net 30%, I would presume, that was agreed upon in advance. By doing so, the venue knew it would kill the project. No valid reason for changing the agreement has apparently been given to Sandra or anybody else. Further down in the announcement, Sandra says that it seems now that both the topics and select few individuals were targeted. She doesn't mention those targeted individuals by name, but afterwards it became obvious which individuals, foremost, that she is hinting at here, namely Dr. A.R. Borden and Michael Lee Hill. Michael is double disappointed, and quite angry to tell the truth. He is furious that Sandra, who invested such a huge amount of her savings, had to experience this, but he is also bringing up another aspect to this. He says that the only common denominator between the closing down of the Spike TV project and the Pythagoras Conference is himself, Michael Lee Hill. Why is that? Because on both occasions, Michael was not only going to talk about the Lake Erie UFO sightings, but was also planning on letting the rest of his story reach the public. He is quite sure that it's this additional information that the authorities want to stop from coming out in the open. We already know some of it from my first paper on Michael Lee Hill, mentioned in the beginning, which has to do with his peculiar blood anomaly, which he, as an abductee, also has in common with another alien abductee, living far away from Michael. The two had never met until Bill Burns of UFO Hunters brought them together for the first time and had their blood drawn while the event was filmed. Their CK levels were astronomically high enough to probably kill a normal person. However, both of them are living healthy lives. The only thing they have in common is the UFO abductions, and the fact that the UFOs they have sighted, independently from each other, seem to be the same type of UFOs, the ones that show up over Lake Erie. Also, in the UFO Hunters documentary about the two abductees, a Harvard professor was interviewed, and he could not explain those remarkable blood anomalies either in these two persons. This was meant to be included in the Spike TV documentary and in the Pythagoras speech, something that the authorities did not want to happen, because if they let him go that far, they also had to let him go even further and tell the rest of the story, which is even more revealing, exposing a big secret to the world. The consequence of Michael's speech, if spread widely and broadly, would be that the government, and ultimately the authorities behind the scenes, the global elite, have to admit that there is an alien presence on Earth, something that consequently will lead towards a full disclosure of the UFO phenomenon. This can't be done, because then the government's criminal secret number one would be revealed at the same time. We know what this secret is, it is called Technology Transfer Programs, TTP. They are terrified that it will be revealed how the government, at least since the 1950s, have been involved in an exchange program with star beings, mostly from the Syrian alliance, where the government gets alien technology, mainly used in the war industry and for mind control, genetic engineering, and the building of their own UFOs, and the aliens get permission to abduct human beings, leaving them with amnesia and in a trauma that usually will affect them for the rest of their lives. And we must assume that the TTP is most possibly just the tip of the iceberg. 3. The timeline of UFO sightings over Lake Erie, starting in the 1800s. The activity over Lake Erie has possibly been going on for hundreds of years, perhaps even more, but then we are really going into folktales and myths. This is something we can research, of course, and it would be quite interesting, but we already have a long timeline with registered and documented events as far back as 1860, and that is pretty impressive. Starting in 1860, these similar events follow the families around Lake Erie for generations. August 18, 1860. Scientific American, New Series, Volume 3, Issue 8, August 18, 1860. Optical illusion on Lake Erie. The Cleveland, Ohio, Herald says that a tremendous thunder shower passed over that city on the night of the 3DINST, and adds between 3 and 4 o'clock next morning the appearance of a vessel on fire was seen far out on the lake. Some persons thought they could distinguish the sails. During a heavy gust of wind the light disappeared. Such appearances are not unfrequent on the lake, and the more experienced men along the dock think there has been no vessel burnt. December 12, 1867. A curious phenomenon on Lake Erie, Brooklyn Eagle, Thursday, December 12, 1867. A mystery on the lakes. The Wizard Lights. A curious phenomenon on Lake Erie. I notice in the dispatch, of the 11th INST*, the following paragraph The statement that a vessel was seen burning off Erie on Tuesday night, is corroborated by several persons living on the highlands south of the city, who say they saw it. On the Tuesday evening mentioned, October 29, at about 7 o'clock, my attention was called by one of my family to a bright light on the lake, having very much the appearance of a vessel on fire. Bringing several objects into range, I watched the light for some time to ascertain whether there was any perceptible motion. The wind was blowing hard at the time down the lake, and a vessel would naturally drift rapidly to leeward, at all events as soon as the propelling power should be interfered with the fire. No motion, however, in any direction was to be discovered, and at once concluded that it was nothing more than the mysterious light, which for many years past, at longer or shorter intervals, has been seen by the inhabitants at this point on the lake shore. The light has made its appearance generally, if not always, in the fall of the year, and usually in the month of November, and almost always during or immediately after a heavy blow from the southwest. The most brilliant exhibition of the light I have ever seen was during the night of the 24th or 25th, as nearly as I can recollect, of November, 1852. It had been my fortune to witness the burning of the steamer Erie, near Silver Creek, several years before, and the resemblance which this light bore to that of the burning steamer was so strong that I confidently expected the arrival of the boats from the wreck during the night. Others with myself watched the light for perhaps 2 hours, and with the aid of a good night glass obtained what seemed to be a very distinct view of the burning vessel. The object appeared to be some 200 or more feet in length upon the water, and about as high above the water as an upper cabin steamer, such as was in use upon the lake 20 years ago. At times the flames would start up in spires or sheets of light, then away from side to side, and then die away, precisely as would be the case with a large fire exposed to a strong wind, and 2 or 3 times there was the appearance of a cloud of sparks, as if some portion of the upper works had fallen into the burning mass below. The sky and water were beautifully irradiated by the light during its great brilliancy. The light gradually subsided, with occasional flashes until it disappeared altogether. The light of Tuesday evening, although very brilliant for a time, was not nearly so brilliant nor of so long duration as that of 1852. I am told that this light was seen by mariners on the lakes as long as 50 years ago, but I am not aware that it has ever been made the subject of philosophical speculation or investigation, or, in fact, has ever obtained the notoriety of a newspaper paragraph before. The only theory approaching plausibility I have heard is that the shifting of the sands caused by the continued and heavy winds of autumn has opened some crevices or seams in the rock of the lake bottom through which gas escapes, and that this gas, owing to some peculiar condition of the atmosphere with which it comes in contact, becomes luminous, or perhaps ignited, and burning with a positive flame. That there are what are called gas springs in the water along this portion of the lake shore is a well-known fact, and that highly inflammable gas in large quantities exist at a comparatively shallow depth on the shore, has been sufficiently proved by the boring of wells at different points, as at Erie, Walnut Creek, and Lock Haven, and by natural springs at Westfield and Fredonia. But whatever the cause, the light is a curious fact, and well worthy the attention of those interested in the investigation of the phenomenon of nature. April 17, 1966. A police chase with a UFO depicted in the 1970s Steven Spielberg film Close Encounters of the Third Kind was inspired by an actual event that happened right here in Ohio. The chase started on the morning of April 17, 1966. Several police crews followed an object they could not identify. Lee says the deputy who first encountered the object described what he saw. "We usually say, 'How big was it at arm's length?' He said it was like a house 50 feet over your head, and that started the chase that ended up in Pennsylvania. They exceeded 100 miles an hour in part of the pursuit. Police followed it into Pennsylvania and eventually ran out of gas." March 4, 1988. This is actually a pretty famous UFO case. Coast Guard personnel responding to citizen reports of unusual aerial activity over Lake Erie on March 4, 1988. Witnessed classic UFOs near East Lake, O. Sheila and Henry Baker were driving home with their 3 children about 8:35 p.m., after taking them out to dinner, and were almost home. As they neared the waterfront, Sheila noticed something hovering over the lake. They drove down to the beach to investigate and got out of the car. The moon was bright, and there was ice on the lake. Sheila could hear it cracking like claps of thunder. Plainly visible was a huge, gunmetal gray, football-shaped, silent object rocking back and forth, blinding white light emanating from both ends. Then the object began moving, swinging one end toward the shore and descending. The Bakers became frightened, ran back to their car, and fled. When they got home, the object was still visible from a window facing the lake. Sheila hid the children in a closet, fearing that the thing might come and get them. The object moved out over the ice and continued to descend, with red and blue lights now flashing in sequence along its lower edge. Sheila called the East Lake Police to report a UFO, and after several referrals, with no one expressing much interest, was told that unusual activity over the lake would be the responsibility of the Coast Guard. Suddenly 5 or 6 bright yellow triangular objects shot out of the center of the large object and began darting around independently, satellite objects. Once they stopped and hovered point up around the parent object, then sped away to the north, turned east, then inland toward the Perry nuclear power plant. At this point Sheila called the Coast Guard, which sent a team to their house to investigate. Seaman James Power and Petty Officer John Knobb arrived towing a Boston whaler, a seaworthy boat, just in case. They told the Bakers that they had seen some lights over the lake from Fairport Harbor and thought they were flares, maybe fishermen trapped out on the ice. However, when Sheila pointed to the main craft and some of the triangular objects still zipping around it, the men drove closer to the lake to investigate, accompanied by the Bakers. At the lakefront they could hear the ice rumbling and roaring. In their incident report sent later by teletype to Coast Guard headquarters in Detroit, MI, the men were quoted as saying that the ice was cracking and moving abnormal amounts as the object came closer to it. Power and Knobb gave a running report on what they were seeing to their base via the two-way radio in their Chevy Suburban. The window was down, and the Bakers overheard them saying words to the effect, "Be advised, the object appears to be landing on the lake. There are other objects moving around it. Be advised, these smaller objects are going at high rates of speed. There are no engine noises and they are very, very low." Abruptly one of the triangles zoomed straight toward the Coast Guard vehicle, a blur of light, then veered east, straight up, and came down beside the parent object. 2 witnesses in separate locations also reported seeing the triangles. Cindy Hale was walking her dog when she noticed a triangular object hovering overhead, and her dog began to whine and cower, animal reactions. She took the dog indoors and came back out to watch. The triangle flashed a series of multicolored lights, then accelerated and was gone without making a sound, hover acceleration. Tim Keck was using his astronomical telescope when one of the triangles caught his eye. He had a cheap throwaway camera with him and snapped a picture of the object before it flew away over the horizon. The photograph was analyzed by optical physicist Bruce Maccabee, who considered it to be illegitimate.